Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the book of Ecclesiastes in our continuing survey of the Old Testament. As we come to this book, I want you to note that it's part of a collection of books known as the Megillot. That's the Hebrew word for scrolls. The oath is plural. Um, and these scrolls, these five scrolls, are read at different times of the Jewish religious calendar. So, for example, Song of Solomon is typically read at Passover. Now, at Passover, they'll also read the account of the Exodus and the deliverance from Egypt, but they'll also read the Song of Songs, which maybe suggests that, yes, you can take that as a love story, but there might be a little bit something more. And we'll look at that when we get there. The dates that I have here, notice they're equivalent, they're in the neighborhood. The Jewish calendar operates on a lunar system rather than a solar system. Um, it's still every spring that's Passover, but it might not be this exact date. It will be roughly in around that season. Ruth, they will read at the feast of Shabbat, or what we call Pentecost. That's about 50 days after the Feast of First Fruits from the Passover season. And that fits because that the story takes place at that time of the year. It's a harvest story. Harvest in Israel, the grain harvest, is in the spring, not in the fall. Lamentations, they will read commemorating the fall of Jerusalem. Now that's not a celebration. That's a mourning. And you say which fall of Jerusalem? Actually, both in 586 BC to the Babylonians, and also in 70 AD when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. They both fell. The temple was destroyed on the same day, many hundreds of years apart. Esther, of course, commemorates Purim, but we're looking right now at Ecclesiastes, and this is read every year at the Feast of Sukkot, or what we call the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's interesting that this book is read at that time because there's something about this book that is going to remind you of the time when the Israelites did not have a home, a permanent home, when they lived in temporary dwellings. And this book is focused upon the temporalness of life, how we live in a temporary dwelling right now, and we're not home yet. But maybe one day we'll get there. All right, it's the book is set up in five sermons, and it revolves around the idea of emptiness. In fact, it starts off the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Notice the son of David would be Solomon, but it does not name him. And then he begins, chapter 1, verse 2, vanity of vanity, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now, that word vanity, avel, is how you say it in Hebrew. It's the same word that is actually used as a name back in Genesis chapter 4, where you had Cain and Abel, Cain and Abel. His name meant emptiness. Now, that's one way to describe it, but here's another way, because how you can have one word that has several meanings, but they might be related, and they are in this case. If you've ever been up north when it's sort of cold and you go out and you breathe out and you can see that vapor coming out of your mouth, and it comes out just for a second and then it disappears. That's emptiness. That's the vapor, the transience, how short it is. And that's the way the preacher is going to view life in this world. And so we start off with Solomon's story. We actually have a brief introduction in the first 11 verses, setting forth this theme of emptiness. But then he goes on in chapter 1, verse 12, I the preacher. Notice he doesn't call himself I the king, even though he started off, the son of David. I the preacher have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. So this is, you're supposed to hear this and think Solomon. This is Solomon speaking. Now, some people think, well, is it Solomon speaking, or is this a later writer? Um, I'm not sure when this was written in its present form, but you hear the son of David and the king, you're supposed to think Solomon. So I'm going to do what it says. I'm going to think Solomon. And he begins to tell his story. And in the telling of his story, he's going to introduce four themes, which will be the themes of the second, third, fourth, and fifth sermon. So he's actually introducing these, and he begins with how there's a monotony to life. You actually see this even in the introduction. Things just continue to happen. The wind blows, and the wind blows this way, and it blows that way, and it never stops doing it. And all things are worrisome, and man is not able to tell it. And there's nothing new under the sun. And now he begins to describe his own journey in such a way, in such a monotonous way. That there is an emptiness in wisdom. So a monotony to life, an emptiness in wisdom, a futility in wealth. Solomon gathered all the wealth that he could, and yet it just didn't seem to be enough. He went and built things. He had slaves and wives and all. And at the end of the day, it sounds like he got bored with it all. It was just, what's the point? And finally, the certainty of death. And in his story, he came to the end and realized, wait a minute, I'm building up this entire kingdom and I can't take it with me. I'm going to leave it to somebody. And I don't know if they're going to do a good thing with it or a bad thing with it or just waste it. What was the point in all of that? And so these 4 points, those are going to be the 4 points that we see in sermons number 2, 3, 4, and 5. But he doesn't end on that note. He ends right at the end. That all of life is emptiness, but man ought to enjoy goodness because it's from God. And so really, but enjoy what you have as a gift from God. And that's how the first sermon ends. And each sermon will end on a similar note. So those 4 points, but each one's going to have that last point as well. We come to the second sermon. It talks about the seasons of life. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot what is planted, and it goes through all the different seasons of life. But in those, again, there's a monotony to life. We saw that in the first sermon with the introduction of that. But we continue to see that everything God does remains forever. But with us, there's just, yes, there's a season for this and that. But again, what's the point? He says in chapter 3, verse 14, I know that everything God does will remain forever. There's nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it. For God is work that men should fear him. But I said to myself down in verse 17, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and for every deed is there. And so he looks at it all and even asks the question, who knows whether the breath of a man goes up, and the breath, and remember the word for breath, the ruach is both breath and or spirit. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes up or the spirit of an animal goes down? When you look at them from the outside, it just, what's the point? There's an emptiness in all of this. And so he sees the monotony of life, and that's the point of the second sermon. So seasons of life, there's a monotony to life, and yet he points out there's a profit in seeing God as the giver of all of these seasons of life. God gave us to enjoy each other. There's something special in that. And yet at the end of it all, you ask that question, what's the point? So to everything there's a season. We saw that. God has made everything appropriate in its time. He actually says this, he has set eternity in their hearts. There's something special about that. Yet, so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. We can't see the big picture the way God sees it. And we look at life and we come to the end and we say, there just seems like there ought to be more. There's an old saying, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And we feel the force of that. Now, these things of having everything appropriate in its time, these seasons of life, this is a gift from God. It is to be seen as a gift, and God's work remains forever. He's going to judge, and the question is asked, who knows what comes after? Now, we know what comes after because we're living in the newer covenant, in the New Testament. We live in that age after Jesus has come, lived, died, risen again, and ascended into heaven. He has told us about life after death, but that had not yet been clearly revealed in the days when Ecclesiastes was written. And so it's left as a question mark. There's hints along the way. There's hints that there's more. You feel that there's more, but nothing was clearly taught as of yet in that progress of revelation. And so the point is, enjoy what you have because it's a gift from God. Now we come to the fourth sermon, third sermon, chapters 4 through 6, and where we see the journey of life and how there's an emptiness of wisdom, and that instead of being fearful, we ought to enjoy life while it lasts because it is a gift from God. And so the point is made that life can be hard, and people can be even harder. There's one another principles that help us to cope with those hardships. We're called to fear God, both in what you say, in your oaths. Be careful about making an oath before God, because He takes such things seriously. And He gives us some points of wisdom. It almost sounds like points of the Proverbs, where we've left poetry behind. We call this part of the poetical books, but there's not a lot of poetry in this section. Instead, what we see are some points of wisdom, and even wisdom in dealing with things like money and wealth. And finally, we come to the point, to the end, enjoy what God has given, because it is a gift. In the fourth sermon, chapters 7 and 8, it deals with the question of what you want in life, that there is futility in wealth and power. People, try to get money, they try to get power, and at the end of the day, it wasn't really worth having. It doesn't buy happiness. It doesn't. It doesn't result in a lot. Power is fleeting. That man sees life as a struggle, but God gave life to be enjoyed. So live in a wise way so that you can enjoy it. You don't want to spend your life climbing the ladder of success only to find out that it's leaning against the wrong wall. So enjoy what God has given. The end of the story isn't here yet. And until the end is reached, you don't know, is it going to be a good ending or is it going to be a bad ending? You won't be able to see the full scope of your life until you get to the end. But it's not here yet. Wisdom, he tells us, is better than money or power. Now, wisdom for its own sake can be rather a downer. It can be, as he said, empty. But wisdom as a way to live wisely, to live well. And by living well, I don't mean living with a lot of money or a lot of possessions. I mean to enjoy life. Live wisely. And that's better than money or power. So you can have a rich man that lives well and lives wisely, or you can have a poor man that doesn't have anything, but he's enjoying it. And so oftentimes I ask, what is it in life that you would do if money were no object? And if you can do that, go do that. And maybe you'll make a little money, maybe not very much. That's okay if you're enjoying the journey. If you're, I like to put it this way, if you're doing that thing for which God made you, then you can find joy and completion in that. So enjoy what God has given. You see how that point comes out at the end of each sermon. Now we get to the fifth sermon. It talks about investing your life and how this life is brief, and then death comes. Let me just say right now, I'm at the latter end of my life. I'm an old fellow. I've been around a long time, 70 plus years, and it looks like there's a lot more life behind me, at least on this earth. Now, I'm not talking about life after death. That's future. But on this earth, there's a lot more life behind me than there is ahead of me. But I'm still enjoying the journey. And the point is made that because of the brevity of this life, man ought to fear the Lord, because you're going to spend a lot more time with Him than you are under the sun, and follow His word. Even though it had not yet clearly been revealed what it would look like, there is that point that there's a judgment coming after your life. And so, what would that matter if there's no life after death? I think the point is made, even though not clearly. There's not a lot of prophecy about what would happen once you died. Chapter 12 tells us, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. That doesn't mean you can't remember him when you're older, but in particular, don't wait until the last minute. Notice, before the evil days come and the years draw near, you will say, I have no delight in them. Sometimes you'll hear people say, do your traveling when you're young. Here, the preacher says, do your worship when you're young. Because there may come a time, notice verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and clouds return after the rain. In other words, while you're over the grass instead of under it, worship the Lord while you can. It continues, in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. If you imagine this as a house, notice the watchmen of the house. Um, a house can get all rickety, and people get rickety too with age. And the mighty men stoop. Think about how the older person is with his posture. He begin where once he might have stood tall. As he gets older, he begins to stoop and droop. And as one of my friends said, he had that what he called the chest of drawers syndrome, where his chest fell into his drawers. The grinding ones stand idle because they are few. They didn't have dentists or bridge work and false teeth back then. So those grinding ones, and now you hear that and it sounds like a house, but remember, it's talking about the human house, the body. And those who look through windows grow dim. As you get older, your eyesight isn't what it used to be. And the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. Your hearing starts to go along with the things that are doing the grinding. And one will arise at the sound of a bird. You would think that if you can't see very well, if you can't hear very well, it would be delightfully easy to go to sleep. But actually, it's just the opposite. The older you get, sometimes the harder it is to get a good night's sleep. So notice, you arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. You can't hear what's going on, and yet you can't quite get to sleep to ignore it. We continue into verse 5. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. You can't stand up to what you used to. I put it this way, I don't bounce like I used to. Older people oftentimes suffer a fall where if they had that same fall when they were younger, they just get up and brush themselves off. Now something gets broken. The almond tree blossoms. You have to picture what an almond tree looks like. Here's a picture. It's the one on the right. When it blossoms, instead of the leaves, you see these white flowers blossom all over it. Your hair changes color, and it goes from whatever color it was to a gray or to a white. And then we have the grasshopper. The grasshopper drags himself along. The bounce is gone out of your step. And the caperberry is ineffective. Now, that one's a bit harder to translate. You might say, Viagra doesn't work any longer. That sort of idea. That was used, caperberry was used as a aphrodisiac. And there comes a time where it just can't do that anymore. And we close, for man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. Remember the Lord before all these things take place, before you get old and before you die. Verse 6, remember him and notice the way it's described, before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed. These are vivid descriptions of the actual parting of the soul and spirit, the death of the person. And the pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, shades of Genesis chapter 2, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Remember the Lord while you're here on earth, because because there's going to come a day when judgment will come. And so you're called to remember the Lord because you're not getting any younger, because God has designed you to be empty without him, to remember him because now is the time to prepare for eternity. Now, before we close Ecclesiastes, I have to ask the question, where do you find the gospel in Ecclesiastes? You say, why do you ask that? Because I think that you can find the gospel in every Old Testament book. Where do you find it here? And I want to suggest that Ecclesiastes tells us that there is a cross-shaped hole in our universe. There's something within you that wants to reach out to God, even if you don't know God. Even if you don't know, is there life after? Is there more to this life than what I can see? Is there more to life after death? And Ecclesiastes places the hunger there and points out the emptiness that is there without God. So without the cross, then, life is futile and without meaning. Without the cross, there's no goal or direction to the seasons of life. Without the cross, wisdom is an empty pursuit. Without the cross, power and wealth will pass away. But you've been bought with a price. And the cross brings meaning to each one of those. And without the cross, the world groans in futility. But it finds its redemption in the power of the resurrection. Because Jesus rose, we are going to rise as well. And the entire earth is waiting and hungering and longing for its redemption that will come when he comes again.